to continue along here. Thank you so much. This is such a rich experience, and we're going to return to the UK, to Portsmouth, and I'm going to turn it over to Ian Bingeman. I learned today in asking him how to pronounce his name that he is the Bingeman of Bingeman Park in Kitchener, which is nearly around the corner from me. So great to meet you, Ian, and I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce the panel.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you to Richard and Uniting for Children and Youth for organizing this conference and for allowing me to introduce our case study from Portsmouth in the UK. My name is Ian Bingeman. My personal pronouns are he and him. I've had the great honor and privilege of serving as the Executive Director of Youth Ottawa here in the city of Ottawa, obviously, for the past 3.5 years. And before that, I was running our school-based civic engagement program for 4 years before that. So for the past 7 years, in Ottawa, I've been engaged in really what we're talking about this morning is it's around education, it's around civic engagements. How do we create opportunities for youth to lead? And I will say, by way of introducing, so this introduction to the Portsmouth case study, I'll give a quick intro to the folks from Portsmouth, but Hayden, I might actually turn over to you to give the fuller presentation because there are quite a few people here and it looks like there's a lot of moving parts, and I didn't quite get that from Ben last time we spoke. So I'll perhaps leave the personal introductions to you and you can explain who's who in the zoo in that. I will, by parentheses, say, I love the fact that you have so many people, because any success that we're going to have in uniting for children and youth and creating child and youth friendly opportunities is going to require a collective impact framework. It's going to require a ton of stakeholders working together in a resourced way. And I'm really interested to hear about that. So I'll let Hayden do the introductions there for the group. But I will actually just give a quick introduction to Youth Ottawa, and I think why Richard asked me to give this introduction in particular. And I'm also going to preface this talk, and I hope you don't mind, with kind of 3 observations based on my conversation with Ben, based on looking at Unloc, the social enterprise online, and what you're doing there, that I hope that I'm most particularly interested in learning about. So I guess I'll introduce Youth Ottawa. We have been a charitable nonprofit in Ottawa since 1997, and prior to taking on the name of Youth Ottawa, our name was Child and Youth Friendly Ottawa, and so this really goes to the heart of what our mission is about. But boiling it down to a nutshell, how do we empower young people to have positive impacts on their community? And that's kind of a broad statement, but the way I like to conceptualize it is, say, Youth Ottawa is a nonprofit. We work in the youth services industry, but we're like the flip side of the coin. You will get a lot of youth services organizations who will provide counseling, who will provide services to youth. If you think of this sector as a coin, we're the flip side of that. We're very much going to what Aaliyah and others have spoken about. How do we create the support opportunities so that young people in turn can provide services to the community? So that's what we're all about. We want to figure out how do we help to facilitate that, and how do we, what level of mentorship supports, what activities do we need to do as a community to unlock the potential of young people to create meaningful change? And I like to, again, a great visual for how this can work is we were able and fortunate to work with the Canadian Senate about 3 years ago on a Youth Indigenize the Senate Day, where they brought together Indigenous youth from across Canada, as well as high school, post-secondary, and we got to work with the Senate on how we would facilitate this conference. And it led to an opportunity for youth to testify before the Canadian Senate on a report they were writing on recommendations for moving forward. It was tied in with the Truth and Reconciliation project that was going on. And I remember one of the young people who we were working with and supporting was able to speak his truth. And I think there's a perfect metaphor, and this happens when you watch the video from that day. There's this young man, William Komaksutixak, who's speaking about the impact in the North of poor mental health supports, of poor mental health on friends that he's lost. And you can tell at one point, he tears up. He's no longer able to speak. And all you see is my colleague's hand just kind of reaches out, touches on the shoulder, and he keeps on going. I think that right there is a visual metaphor, is what we're trying to achieve as an organization within Ottawa. And then to do this, we really have 2 levels of operations. On the one hand, we're looking at the fact that we have a 10%, 90% problem in Ottawa which is that 10% of the leadership and engagement and democratic opportunities, or sorry, all the democratic opportunities are going to about 10% of the young people. And they're getting burnt out. And the other 90% of the young people aren't getting opportunities. So what we do is we've actually created a program where we go directly into schools and we work on a civic engagement program. We turn over the young people and say, what grinds your gears? What's something in your communities you want to change, and how do we go about doing that? And then through a facilitated ongoing program, they get a chance to do that. What's really cool is on our impact metrics, when we look at the predeterminers of lifelong civic engagement, we have an 80% plus success rate for participants of getting to grow on one of those metrics for how to become lifelong active and engaged citizens. So that's our one level of operations. We work in schools to do that. And our second level is amplification, where we look at those remarkable young people who have self-started a project. And I think the case study we're gonna get to in Portsmouth is an excellent example of that. And we look at how do we support them in growing their impact. Because Aaliyah, when you were speaking earlier, it really resonated with me, because the reason that we're in this work, the reason why we do what we do, is we have a firm belief in the fact that it's not just a good thing to involve young people in decision making today, it's a necessary thing. There are qualities that young people bring that if we don't have that involved in decision making right now, we have poor outcomes. And just very quickly off the top of my head, innovation. The most innovative time of a person's life per neuroscience is between 15 and 25 years old. We have very complex problems out there. And this is the point in time when the human brain can literally think around the corners of problems. We have lived experiences. Young people have their fingers on the zeitgeist of the times much better than I do, much better than many of us on this conference call. They can see the trends emerging that we miss. They have perspective, they have lived experience of the problems that we need to bring into our decision-making processes. And finally, just a very brief kind of like why we do what we do, it's the passion and intensity. Unfortunately for many, not many on this call, as you get older, that fire in your belly, the kind of rage we feel at injustices, it tends to diminish over time. Young people have that in spades. And again, if we don't have that fire in our bellies, change does not happen. So that's by all like why I'm here introducing us, what you thought it was about, what we stand for. And I think as I introduced the case study from Portsmouth that started with the Council of Portsmouth Students, that has led into a business. I'm not sure, I need to perhaps introduce if it's a social enterprise or a full enterprise, I'm not sure, but that is led towards supporting young people's development. And so the few things that I really resonated with when I spoke with your colleague Ben Hayden earlier was the for youth by youth approach here. This was started by young people for young people. That is the best solution for young people, period. We need to figure out ways that we can unlock young people to drive solutions for other young people. And I'll say that Youth Ottawa in our approach, for example, the school program started with a young man when he was in his teacher's college and decided that this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to start a one-day conference. I'm going to bring together a bunch of youth, a bunch of nonprofits, and we're going to solve a bunch of problems. So we had a very similar start as you did there. The other thing that I really liked about this is that you're doing a school-based approach in much of what Unloc is doing. And I think that this comes down to the idea of like, let's use and leverage the community resources that are already in place. The one criticism, major criticism I have of this conference and almost every conference I sit on is there's almost no conversation or consideration given to the resourcing of these ideas. We have a ton of good ideas, but if we're not going to resource them, if we're not going to spend at least an equal amount of time thinking about how do we resource our ideas going forward so that we can implement them, they're not going to be in a good position to succeed. So what I liked about this is you're already starting with an approach of saying, let's work within pre-existing frameworks we have where we're pouring billions of dollars into a public asset and figure out how we can grow from there. And the final thing, and this is the piece that I'm most excited to learn more about, is this development into a social enterprise. This has been a very challenging year for the nonprofit sector, probably across the world, but in Canada, for context, the charitable sector has lost at least 40% of our revenues owing to COVID. Youth Ottawa, it was more than that this year. It's been a very, very difficult year. And I think what really stood out to me when I was talking with Ben ahead of this talk was how the Council of Portsmouth Students lost its funding from a government source and had to think of new ways of resourcing. So I'm very interested to learn what that looked like, because again, if we can't figure out ways to resource this as a community going forward, we're doomed to just have this continual cycle of great ideas, initial funding ends, idea ends, and they just lather and repeat. So I'm very interested to learn about that. I'll stop talking. I'll turn it over to Hayden to lead it. And again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Ian, and thanks so much for the wonderful introduction. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. And what a pleasure it is to be with you all, to share with you a bit about our story and our journey. For the eagle-eyed amongst you, you will notice that my name is not Ben Dowling. Unfortunately, Ben had a family emergency about half an hour ago, and I was watching a really awful film on Netflix and got a call from him to jump in. So I'm doing my best stand-in job today to share with you our story and our journey, and I'm hoping that I can share that as usefully as I possibly can. I'm going to just very quickly share my screen because we've got a few visuals that we'll use for today's session. Hopefully you can all see that now. Good stuff. And we've got a really incredible panel as well. And my role today will be kind of the glue between each of the panel members, who all bring kind of really unique and really valuable perspectives, I think, to sharing some of the models we've used in Portsmouth and some of the impact that that's had. So for context, Portsmouth is a kind of medium-sized city or town on the south coast of England. You can see us there in that little red dot, just off the coast of, or near the Isle of Wight, I should say. We've got roughly 250,000 people. I think we have a really vibrant student voice and youth leadership ecosystem. And it's worth saying it's not perfect. We're still working on it. There's still lots to be done, for sure. And there's more we can be doing. But I'm hoping today we can share with you a bit about the journey that we've been on so far. And hopefully that will be valuable. But before I go any further, I'm just going to ask some of my colleagues who are with us today just to give us a kind of a 2-sentence intro, and then I will hand over to each of them in turn to give you 5 to 7 minutes of their perspectives on student voice in Portsmouth. And we've got a range of different stakeholders too, from different settings, from school settings to local authority settings and so on. So first of all, if I could ask David just to introduce yourself quickly.
Hello, David Hart. Like Derry, student participation, voice, peer teaching has been a central part of my career as a youth worker, as a teacher, in both primary and secondary areas, as a senior manager and as a local education advisor. And I was in at the start, at the formal start, if you like, of the student voice in Portsmouth. And became very friendly with Derry on my way and have learned a great deal. So yes, I will start with some education stuff, but please be assured that we'll move out of that sphere and into the broader sphere as we go along.
Okay, thanks, David. Super. Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Christoper. I work for Portsmouth City Council. I'm Portsmouth Education Partnership and School Inclusion Manager, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the partnership when I speak later on. Very pleased to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful, Sarah. Thank you. Ella.
Hi, I'm Ella. I'm a student, alumni of some of Unloc's programs. I'm now a One Youth Ambassador as well.
Awesome stuff, Ella. Great to see you. And Steve.
Hi, Steve Labedz. I've been a teacher for 40 years, 30 years in school leadership. At the moment, I run 2 schools and a college in Portsmouth.
Great stuff. Thanks, Steve. So before I hand over to each of our wonderful panel in turn, I'm just going to give you a bit of background as to the work of Unloc and how this all came about in Portsmouth. And it all started with the project that we've already heard a little bit about, the Council of Portsmouth Students, this incredible forum of young leaders from all of our schools in the city of Portsmouth, whether that be a state school, a private school, an SEN school, a college. We invited young people from all of these different settings and outside of education too. We invited people in to be part of this forum. And it was fundamentally about young people leading the way and driving school improvement. So a constant frustration we hear from young people is it's always school leadership, your head teacher and the SLT around that head teacher that make the decisions about the direction in which a particular school or college, or even at a higher level, when you look at government policy, it's ministers and those around those ministers that make high-level policy decisions, and young people feel like they're the missing part of that equation. And COPS was all about giving young people the platform to actually influence those policies and influence the direction in which they were moving in, and to ultimately help set that direction in partnership with those senior leaders. So fundamentally, if you kind of really boil it down into one phrase, it was about building a learning community where young people and adults were involved.
72 participants.
Oh, okay. Derry, I think you need to just pop yourself on mute.
Did I dabble? I didn't.
Well, you went very fast, but it was...
Okay, I'm going to hopefully crack on, and hopefully Derry comes on mute. So yeah, fundamentally, it's about creating a learning community where young people and adults can work together collaboratively to improve education for the benefit of young people fundamentally. And a bit about me, and this is the start of our story really. This chap here, the person closest to you is a 14-year-old version of me. I'm now 24. I hesitated there, I had to think about that one. And the chap on the far right-hand side is the Minister for Education. And this was an incredible experience that was created as part of my journey with the Council of Portsmouth Students. It was young people lobbying the highest decision makers on things that we cared about. This particular meeting that you can see the photo from was about sex and relationships education. And all of the young people around the table were really passionate about this particular issue, and were particularly angry that the government had made the decision to make sex and relationships education largely non-compulsory for schools to deliver. So young people picked up the mantle, and through the medium of COPS, the Council of Portsmouth Students, started working on trying to change that policy direction. And COPS also gives you a whole range of skills. For me, it taught me how to be resilient, when, a policy maker or a head teacher or somebody within my school said, that's a rubbish idea, the ability to, with the help of peers, bounce back from that. Of course, leadership skills, working with others, and it's developed my confidence too. And if I'm honest, that the Council of Portsmouth Students has probably been the most valuable education experience I've ever had. Of course, the formal education bit is really important, and I'm conscious of the fact that Steve Labedz is also my ex-head teacher here, but the Council of Portsmouth Students as a process and a programme was probably the most valuable education experience I've ever had, and has taught me so much about who I am and what I care about. And it was back in 2012 that the Council of Portsmouth Students programme effectively lost its funding when a redundancy was made, and this was part of a whole range of cuts across the local authority, where youth services were really diminished in the United Kingdom, and it was heartbreaking. I remember, having the conversation with David Hart, who will speak shortly, about the fact that the Council of Portsmouth Students effectively no longer had the infrastructure it once had. And feeling kind of completely disorientated, unsure of how on earth we could keep such an incredible program alive. So Ben and I, as the founders of Unloc, kind of had to deal with three main issues. First of all, the budget. How do we keep this sustained? How do we keep it running and resourced? Second of all, at the time, Ben and I were both in education. I was just going into my GCSE exams. Ben was going into his college exams. And then third and finally, we had really very little people around us in the way of adults that had, the time that we needed to really resource this properly. So those were three of the main issues that were created out of that loss of funding from the government, and fundamentally it ended up with me feeling a little like this. I remember my head of year 10 at the time, Mr. Ball, pulling me aside to the Enterprise Suite at Admiral Lord Nelson School, which I always felt was kind of just like a glorified coffee shop with, like, nice Mars bars that you could buy. And he sat me down and said, "Hayden, I can tell that you're upset. What's up?" And I just burst into tears at this point and said to him, "You know what? It's absolutely nothing to do with the fact that this has happened to me, but it's knowing that future generations of young people won't have that transformative educational experience as well as student voice experience that I once had." So rather than kind of rest on our laurels, we came across this concept of social enterprise, the idea of bringing people, planet, and money together to create a sustainable vehicle to drive forward positive social change, which is what we did. We created Unloc. We've been running in the United Kingdom since 2013, since I was legally old enough to register the company with Ben. And as of last year, we work with 11,000 young people in the city of Portsmouth and beyond, all about creating platforms for young people to be innovative change makers. Those are the key words in our mission statement. We create platforms for young people to be innovative change makers. And that's really the premise of it. And it all came out of that small seed from the Council of Portsmouth Students. And as I said, we wanted to create these platforms that are fun, exciting, which gave young people the opportunity to lead in their communities. And it's given me and Ben some incredible experiences too, to help other countries around the world or political parties around the world to understand what student voice and young people as change makers can do. I had the incredible honor to be in the incredible city of Ottawa back in 2016. And I, to this day, am deeply missing the incredible culture, and of course the wonderful coffee and cinnamon buns, which kept me going every day. So I also feel like I have a deep affinity to Ottawa, and so delighted to be with you this morning. So I've captured this already. It's about platforms for young people to be innovative change makers who then build stronger communities and sustainable businesses. And just below that mission statement, you can see 4 key words, or 4 key phrases, I should say: leadership skills, entrepreneurial skills, student voice, and career pathways. Those are Unloc's 4 pillars of work. And it's you'll notice it's not just about student voice. We're looking at young people as change makers through different lenses. A young person setting up a business, which then creates positive change, is a great example of student voice. So we're trying to create different opportunities that will engage different types of young people in programs that they feel they can contribute to and start their journey into being positive and active members of society. And COPS itself is not only a legacy that we inherited. It's not just a forum, it's not just a platform or a learning experience, it's whatever the young people decide they want it to be. COPS to this day is led by young people. We are there as facilitators. That's our role. The support and infrastructure so that those young people can really achieve what they want to achieve. So hopefully that's set the scene for you. I'm going to stop talking at this point, and I'm going to hand over to David now. David. David, I don't know if you're on mute. I can't hear you just yet.
Is that better?
Yes, it is. Wonderful. Thanks, David.
Excellent. Yes. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I'm inevitably going to repeat a little bit some parts of what Hayden has already told you, but essentially what I'd like to do is describe from the beginning some of the crucial events, some of the activities, and some of the kind of ideas along the way that I hope will make a helpful contribution to the conference, and to perhaps enable cities like Ottawa or whatever to grow and develop, and to also join in, for Portsmouth to join in that growth and development. I mean, I'm going back to 2002 to start a story, but a bit like Hayden has just said, anybody wanting to develop the youth participation and voice has to be very patient, because I think after nearly 18 years, there's still an awful lot to do and an awful lot of development still to come. And that's about the slow process of cultural development. And I think sometimes trying to accelerate that development too quickly does create places where it can fall over too easily. So can I just give you some sort of brief background? In 2002, the education department in Portsmouth agreed with head teachers in city schools, all the head teachers in city schools, to a 3-year partnership with Sussex University. And the idea was to use the leadership and the research from Sussex to begin a learning community within schools. And that partnership, that buy-in to the partnership was crucial, because it also came with funding and got underway. The principles of developing the learning community, as we agreed at the time, was to do school-to-school learning, so schools with strengths sharing what they're doing, and all schools have strengths that they can share. Assessment for learning, which is to enable young people to begin to actually identify the steps that they've taken, and in partnership with their teachers to plan a way forward and take some responsibility control of that, and the student voice. Now, that was within schools, that was a learning community, but actually more broadly, I think if you're a city, the learning community idea can still work. Community learning from community, assessment for learning, people actually putting time and effort into seeing the direction they've come from and agreeing the direction that they wish to go, steps to take, and obviously as soon and as an integral part of that, to engage young people in what they want to achieve. A really important part at the beginning point in Portsmouth was inclusion. And the first opportunity for students to have a voice in schools happened in 2003. A conference was called for 6 young representatives of secondary schools and special schools from across the city. They were invited to attend a conference. The chosen venue for this inaugural conference was a special school, sports hall in a special school. So an awful lot of young people in one large space. And from the start, that notion of inclusion became a really important part of what we were doing. Real care in that conference, in that setup conference, was taken to enable the participants to actually identify their own priorities and their own agenda for what might make schools better places to learn. That was the sort of general question that was asked. But we put white paper over a 50-foot of gymnasium wall. And we invited the young people at the beginning of the morning to talk with each other and identify the kind of things that were happening in schools now, the kind of things that they really enjoyed, the kind of things that they would like to actually alter, change to make learning better. And then after break, we asked them to start looking at what they would like schools to be in the future and to draw and write and express that. So on the 50-foot wall, there was a whole bunch on one side, a whole bunch on the other. And we spent the afternoon basically saying, what steps can be taken to move from the left-hand side to the right-hand side of the wall? And more importantly, what role can students play as they moved along those steps? And by the end of the afternoon, the young people had recognized the strengths and weaknesses in their own school, recognized excellent things happening in other schools and become curious about them. And they asked for the formation of a student council to continue the work of improving and developing those ideas. So COPs came from young people saying, this has been a great experience. Can we carry on the conversation? Anyway, probably 3-4 weeks later, when we got it all together, Derry and I met with representatives from students across the city. And they developed an agenda based on the conference. They democratically elected a chair and an executive, thanks to Derry, developed a communication strategy that asked for and identified the need for a central, if you like, adult admin role, which I had with the secretarial support I was able at that time to muster, and a request by the students to identify a student voice link teacher in each school, because they recognized that the amount of effort it would need to pull everything together was going to also be distracting to an awful lot of the learning. And that was great because the head teachers were in a position to actually say, that sounds like a great idea. And so a position was created that enabled some of just the communication to happen and to allow young people to continue with their learning whilst also being actively engaged. Where else were we? Yeah, agreed to meet key education leaders for questions and answer sessions at COPS meetings. So the Director of Education would come. I want to offer a brief reflection. They decided that the students decided that they wanted to pose questions to the leader of education, and they created questions, and they tossed a coin for who was going to take first dibs. And the first person to ask a question happened to be a person from a special school with no voice. They had one of the Steve Hawking voice things, and he had typed in his question, and when it came, he pushed the button, and his voice, this voice said, "I would like to ask why school holidays, or could school holidays be shorter?" And there was a ripple of laughter around the room. And then there was the sound of jaws dropping from the other students, recognizing suddenly that there were other perspectives than just the business of learning and then leisure and learning. And that was a wonderful step in many ways, because it did actually throw the notion of what learning is and the kind of influences on learning outside of the school. Things like safe routes to schools became part of, gosh, this is important. Feeling confident and safe as I walk to school is important. So not only was the learning bit happening, but the students were beginning to look outside of the school in terms of what affects learning. They developed an annual Student Voice Day to celebrate what they were achieving in schools, recommended the creation of a primary COPS, which is where I think I first met Hayden as a representative from his primary school, before he then became a significant member of COPS. So his journey has been almost as long as mine in terms of the voice. And at the heart of the priorities, as Hayden demonstrated with the Minister for Education, was the life skills issues, sex education, relationships, personal development, learning, all of those kinds. Anyway, next bit of learning, and I'll try and hurry up. Cooperation, not competition, between departments became a really important part of the story in Portsmouth. So many departments and agencies, because of UNCRC, were increasingly expected to be consulting with young people. And it was quite rightly seen that the COPS and education were not the only game in town. However, you know, there was the potential of people saying, why are we funding that if they're funding that, or ours is more important than, you know, there was competition built into that sort of system. Our student voice. And interestingly, it was the COPsters who made some of the really important links. So the youth service set up a Portsmouth Youth Parliament to deal with the broad issues, and many of the COPsters recognising this was a brilliant way of continuing to develop the skills that they had. And there was a Children in Care Council for young people who were in care. And in 2008, I think, a member of the Children in Care Council was the chair of COPS. So the young people themselves started to move across the boundaries. And within the moving across the boundaries, there was the beginnings of a recognition that there was a really important part to be played by young people across the whole patch. The Sussex University project finished in 2005, but by that time there was sufficient infrastructure, precedent, momentum. I had control of a budget called the Healthy Schools budget, and because of their interest in personal development learning, I was able to direct some of that money towards continuing to fund the programme. By 2011, the global financial crisis led to a significant cuts being made to local government, including to the any centralised funding, administrative support for COPS, and many of the other youth forums. And as my role in the development and administration ended at that point, I think I can hand over to whoever it is to take it on.
Thanks, David. Good stuff. We're heading over to Sarah at Portsmouth City Council now.
Thanks, Hayden. Hayden, have you got my slides that I shared with Ben or not? Fabulous, thank you. So yeah, I'm Sarah. I work for the Education Department within the City Council, which is obviously the department that cut that funding back in 2012. I'm very pleased to say it was nothing to do with me. In 2012, I was a teacher in London, and the council has changed quite a lot since then. And when I was talking to Ben in preparation for this, I did sort of say, well, one of the things I almost want to say is that we kind of wish that Unloc didn't have to exist. And he said that he himself has said that quite a few times, in as much as actually I fundamentally believe this stuff should be centrally funded, but we're just not in a position where that can happen in many, many areas. So I'm hugely, hugely grateful to the work that Unloc do, because we can't do it without them. So part of my role, employed by the City Council, but part of the Portsmouth Education Partnership, which is much broader than the City Council, and our byline is pulling together and achieving more. And Steve, who you'll hear from later, is the chair of that partnership. And within that partnership, parents, carers, and absolutely children and young people are crucial players in that. And Unloc is also an important part of the jigsaw. And actually our logo is a jigsaw with everyone coming together in a circle. And as a City Council now, what we do is we work alongside Unloc, very, very supportive of their role in terms of emotional, practical, and to a degree financial support, obviously not as much as we would like to do, but actually we do support a number of their projects. And where things come up where we don't have the capacity to engage with young people, we will often ask Unloc to do that on our behalf, and where there's funding attached to that, we will commission them to do that, because they do such an amazing piece of work. Given the huge role that Unloc play, as a City Council, we do still take our own responsibilities to involve children and young people very seriously. We're not going to pass it all to Unloc, and there is a really strong sense of moral purpose from senior colleagues and elected members in that we do absolutely need to work with young people. And what we do is we aim to work in co-production around a lot of our decision making. I'm not sure if that's a term that people on the call are familiar with. We talk about like a co-production ladder, where at the bottom of the ladder you just have people sort of doing things to children and young people. As you walk up, you're talking about consultation, engagement, information, but actually that's still really doing things for young people, maybe kind of asking their opinion, but not necessarily having their voices really being heard. And then co-production is where you're doing things with young people in an equal and reciprocal partnership. So one example of this, Hayden, if you can go on to the next slide now, that would be great, thank you, is A Future in Mind, which was a young people's co-production group talking about mental health, and with looking at some funding that we had around mental health. And we brought together very much a co-produced conference. So we had as many young people in the room as we had educators and health professionals, and we very strictly limited the tickets to professionals so that young people had an equal voice. And Ella, who you'll hear from later, was part of the young people, the group of young people organising that conference. And that group looks very much at how our mental health services were delivered or are being delivered, and reviewed and refined some of the processes. So for example, they totally changed the way that we transition from children and adolescent mental health services to adult mental health services. And actually that's a really difficult transition for young people, and our young people were able to change the way that practitioners address that. So at this event that we held as in a way, a one-off conference, a bit of a talking shop, but actually what we did there was we came together to discuss some government proposals, which at the time was a green paper, and we put together a joint response on behalf of the Education Partnership, where young people's voices were absolutely front and centre, and they decided what our priorities in that would be. And I strongly believe that when we later bid for additional resources for mental health support teams in schools, that the work that young people had been part of was enabled us to be successful in that bid, and again a subsequent bid, such that we're now one of the first areas in the country to have full coverage of mental health support teams. One of our current priorities then, if you go on to the next one please, Hayden, is to look at the Member of Youth Parliament role, which is a national role alongside the British Youth Council. And one of our current priorities is to secure further engagement. That point that was made earlier about 10% of young people getting 90% of the opportunities. And we do have a current member. It's Laura, you can see sitting on the green benches in Parliament. I wasn't allowed to do it, but I did anyway. I'm sitting up in the balcony taking a picture of her down on the benches in the House of Commons, obviously pre-pandemic, but an amazing experience for her to be sitting with peers around the country debating campaigns that then go feedback into Parliament. Laura was elected from her peers as part of COPS. And what we want to do with the next election, and we're in the process of starting to launch this, is to have a much broader campaign to engage a much wider group of people. And Unloc have got some even fantastic plans about how we can do some education around this as well, but actually to engage people in potentially standing, but definitely in voting and seeing that they can make a difference. And we're working really closely to ensure that some of our more vulnerable groups, including groups working with young carers and the LGBTQ groups, to make sure that they are actually part of this and are very much engaged and involved in that process. And Laura has been able, in her role as Member of Youth Parliament, to go to a number of schools and get their views from their different participation groups to feed into a big piece of consultation we're doing across the city called My City Vision. And at first she was a little bit nervous about doing that, and I kind of stood alongside her, but actually once she started talking, she was off, and I was able to sit right at the back of the room, and her leading those sessions meant that we got so much more out of them than had they been done by an adult. And just finally, before I hand over to you to speak to Ella, we're also really proud of the work that we do with our children and young people with special educational needs. I'm really proud to have inclusion in my job title. David talked about the inclusion back at the inception of COPS. And often these are young people who may sometimes be overlooked, because sometimes it can be a little bit harder to get them involved. But actually we're really proud of this work. It's ongoing, and we have a young people's co-production group called Dynamite. They kind of sell themselves down. They say, oh, we have pizza evenings. What they do is they have amazing consultation events, and pizza is sometimes the enticement to get people there. And in fact, even during COVID, they're working from home on Zoom, but they get their pizza reimbursed. So they're still sitting in their own house, and they're getting their pizza Absolutely, yeah, don't underestimate the power of pizza, absolutely. But what Dynamite have done is that some of these potentially quite vulnerable young people have absolutely shifted the way that services for children and young people with SEND are produced. I don't know if you can see on the slide there, this is a recent inspection really noting that the difference they make, and the young inspectors are a team of young people with SEND who've been trained but who actually go out and check how accessible services are, how well they're promoting themselves. And so what we've got is actually young people getting those leadership skills to show that they really can affect change, not just for themselves, but for others within the city. So as we've been said already, you know, it's an example. We are still very, very much on a journey, but we are really keen to make sure, as has already been said, that it's not just tokenistic. We do genuinely want to find ways to make a difference. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Sarah. And we're heading over to Ella now.
Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button. I'm Ella. So I've worked with Unloc on a lot of their programs as a participant. And the first thing I want to say is that programs like COPS and co-production projects, they do work. They create real change. They empower young people. And I guess what I'd like to do is use myself in a non-vain way to show that these do work and things do happen. But the first thing I would like to say is that these opportunities should be available to all young people. So the story I normally start off with, and I know the guys at Unloc don't like me putting it down to luck, but the reason I'm involved in so many youth voice projects is over a game of rock, paper, scissors. So I was part of my school council in year 8 or year 7. I don't know, one of the two. And the opportunity came up for some young people to go to COPS. And there was one space left. And I didn't, to be honest, I wasn't fussed. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go. So me and this other girl, we did rock, paper, scissors to see who would get the place. In my head, really, I was thinking, yes, day out of school, this is going to be great. And I won. Didn't really know what I was letting myself in for. But I got there and I was like, you know, this is quite cool. You know, this is better than just a day out of school. And I went back and I got involved in, I think my first action group was a disability inclusion action group. So I got to work with people from Portsmouth, some older than me, some younger than me, and young people from SEM schools as well, to talk about how we can ensure that, you know, students in mainstream schools and special needs schools aren't treated differently, and we all get to work together. And I'd say nothing tangible came out of that, but I believe that was because at that point none of us knew the power our voices could have. So I went back the next year. I was like, yeah, it was good last year, let's go again. And I thought, you know what, I'll stand for the executive group as well. So I was then voted in vice chair of COPS. I got involved in an LGBTQ plus, there we go, action group. And we're talking about the ways that education around those topics should be improved in schools. I went back, I was involved in governor meetings at school, and that's when I realized that adults are almost scared of the opinions of young people. So I went to a governor's meeting for my school, and I went with another young person, and we were saying, look, we want new teachers to be trained in how they can help young people, whether it's topics of sexual health, sexual identity, that sort of thing. And it appears the information that we'd brought with us and we were going to propose to our head teacher had already been shared prior to the meeting. So we were sat there, we were fighting our corner, and our head teacher had no disrespect to her, she had an answer for everything. And we thought, right, this isn't how it should be. You know, we want to show the views of the people around us, and we kept fighting. And we went to COPS and we brought back the same ideas each year, different ideas for different topics as well. And that's, I think, when it really hit me that young people, we have this power, but I think the mindsets of the people with the ability to make this change need to change. So essentially what COPS has done has made me very determined to empower the young people around me. And this is where I believe that all young people should have these opportunities, because it is, as rightly said, 10% of young people get 90% of the opportunities. I am crazy busy all the time because I'm so determined to ensure that young people's voices are heard. And it's sort of been a domino effect for me. So I joined COPS, was vice chair for 2 years. I stayed at the forum for 4. I was head girl at secondary school. I got involved in the Future in Mind project. I've been to the House of Commons 3 times, one of which was with COPS as we celebrated, I think it was their 15th birthday. All of these great events I've managed to go to, and I'm now a One Youth ambassador as well. And this is definitely something I wouldn't have gotten involved in had I not done COPS. So I get to meet with young people from across the country, and we work with the One campaign to tackle extreme poverty and preventable disease. So we lobby our MPs, we go to Parliament. We went to Portcullis House last year before COVID. We were lobbying our MPs to support funding for Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. And the best thing for us is when our lobbying, it results in something. So the UK government did support funding for Gavi this year, or last year. Academic years, they threw me off. So it was this year. And it was great for us to see, look, it may not have been us on our own, but we were able to lobby our MPs with other young people. We wrote to ministers, we spoke to people in our communities, and we've just ensured that people across the world are going to have access to the vaccines they need. And it all boils down to the catchphrase that we have as ambassadors, that where you live shouldn't determine whether you live. And that for me is, I think, wow, I've just gone from thinking about, I joined the school council and we were moaning about the toilets not being very nice. And I'm now lobbying with other young people to ensure that children have the right to an education and a meaningful life. And you just have to step back and think, wow, without organisations like Unloc, these young people wouldn't be this empowered. And that's why I will repeat it again, all young people should have access to these opportunities, because we are responsible for encouraging others to get involved. And if anything, we have the power to do the empowering. And if I hadn't won that game of rock, paper, scissors, I don't know what Ella would be doing now, to be honest. But it's great to think that these opportunities are there for young people, but we just need to see more, and we need to see them more accessible. And I think one thing we need to take away from the pandemic is that we can't use not being able to meet in person as an excuse to not get young people together anymore. There is so much scope for using Zoom and other platforms to have young people come together, not just for talking shops, but to create change and shape a world that we really want to see. So find the young people within your organisations around you and empower them to empower other people. That's all I'll say. Thank you.
Incredible, Ella. And I don't know what I would do had you have not won that rock, paper, scissors game as well. And Ella's now on Unloc's board as well. And we're really chuffed to have her with us. Okay, Steve, you're up.
Okay, and to cheer up the moderator, I'll promise I'll be very brief, because most of what I was going to say has been said much more eloquently by a lot of other people around the panel, and I have to say particularly by those people considerably younger than me. So I'll focus on a couple of things only. First of all, it's important to say I'm in awe of things like Unloc, but that's what I always knew there could be. And my role as an educator has been to try and allow things like that to be set up. Very early on in my teaching career, I realized we genuinely were educating for a future. And if you're educating for a future, you have to look at the skills that young people need to be successful in that future. And it is about empowerment, and it's about making sure they've got the opportunities to get the right skills. And it doesn't matter where you Google, the skills are always much the same. Their creativity, their resilience, their agility, adaptability, their collaboration, the ability to negotiate, their complex problem solving, and most of all, their leadership. And a traditional school curriculum that is in its narrow little silos does some of that, but not enough of that. So any school leader that's worth their salt knows that they have to look at the bigger picture, and that includes therefore looking at how do you bring students into it. And there's been a few comments in the chat as to how do you preserve that group of people who support student voice to the extent that we do in Portsmouth. And it's actually by winning this argument with lots of educators who don't instinctively get it. So if you focus on the skills, that's a massive argument because it's self-evident. If you focus on the other thing, which is also self-evident, if you run, as I do, schools of, at the moment we've got 2,000 students in, almost all the brains are in those young people. Those of us who are trying to run the place, those of us who are teaching us, we might know how to get things done, but we've lost the scope to come up with brilliant ideas. And obviously, you might have the odd one or two, but all the brains, all the capabilities are in the young people. And if you don't release that, then as an educator, you're just letting everybody down, yourself and everything else, because your schools will improve if you let that through. So that's the second thing. And the third thing we link with that, which is particularly important in our fragile democracies at the moment across the world, is if you engage people in making change possible when they're young, then they'll stay engaged in that process for the rest of their life. And that's something that is really, really crucial to us as we come to terms with where we are in this world. So I had lots of examples of things that have worked really well on for student voice, but I don't want to go through all those because we haven't got time. And I would like to leave a little bit of space for questions. But the mistakes that people make in empowerment of youth, I don't think anybody around this virtual conference is going to make, but those are the ones I work at with educators who don't necessarily get this, who think that having a school council is the answer. That's it. I've got a school council, so my student voice is intact. And actually, that's the worst kind of tokenism, although a well-run school council that actually makes a difference can be brilliant. And the last thing, and that's why I supported COPS and still support COPS and Unloc, is it's that idea of collaboration between institutions. We cannot change the education world working alone. You can have the best school in the world at doing these things. If you're not collaborating with other schools, take your ball home and go away, because it has to be between people that we make this happen. And that's a minute longer than I promised the moderator. So there you go. I'll stop.
Brilliantly done, Steve, and hopefully we'll be able to tease out some other bits that you might have talked about in the questions. I just want to very quickly address a couple of the key questions that came out, some mechanics of the project. First of all, around the funding model. The model of COPS is based around every participating school or college contributing the same amount. So they all put in roughly £1,000 British into the pot, and that funds the project. Naturally, the cost of rising pensions and the cost of technology and so on means that no longer actually covers the cost of it. But because we've grown Unloc out, we're able to now subsidise it. But the fundamental economics of the model is that every school chips in. And we're really pleased that we've actually got commitment from all the schools to continue chipping in until at least 2023. Which is fabulous. And I think Steve kind of alluded to it, and there was some comments on it. You know, schools that put the money in feel more invested in the project, and we're able to actually hold them to account to their commitments to the project too. Just one very quick piece of good news as well, given we were talking about how do we widen the impact of COPS. So it's not just the 10% of the students that are doing 90% of the work. I found out just last week, and my colleagues on the panel won't have heard this yet, but we secured £175,000 over a 3-year period to deliver democratic education in Portsmouth schools, focused on reaching those that are not yet involved. So I think the impact will continue to ripple out, and I just wanted to share that good news with everyone whilst we've got it. Moderator, I don't know if you want to take questions now or how you want to do that.
I think if we may break for lunch here. It seems to me I've been given the title of moderator, but I think in these ideas and these things that are coming out, the last thing we need is moderation. We need way more of this. Stephanie has an idea.
I have a question, actually. Is as I've been listening to you guys talk. So my kids homeschooled for many years, so I was involved in the homeschooling community, and you know, over time, as I got more involved, I became one of the organizers and the leaders and the idea people and all of that. So I'm thinking about that experience, my own as a homeschool parent, and what I witnessed with other parents, and now comparing it to your experience as students. And what I'm thinking is, it takes a while to kind of get to know new ideas. So my experience in homeschooling, it took a while to kind of get to understand what the lay of the land was. That takes maybe a year, 2 years. You're busy homeschooling your kids, like you sort of have a certain part of your brain power that's open to hearing that stuff. So by the time I kind of understood what was happening and what my opportunities were to get involved, you know, it was already a few years, and I did get involved because there were already some systems in place that I could step into and help bring forward. But many of the parents that I talked to said, you know, we've tried setting up co-ops in the past and it never works because people are so busy with their kids. And by the time that the kind of energy of the co-op is starting to go, their kids have decided to go to school or they're too old. So they're no longer involved and they drop it and the co-op drops. So I'm wondering, sorry, it's a bit of a convoluted thought still, but I'm wondering how that plays into the notion of getting young people involved in this kind of stuff. Like Hayden, you mentioned that you were involved with COPs at the primary level. So you kind of, at a very young age, were already starting to know that this kind of stuff was out there. And so during your years of 15 to 25, which somebody said was, you know, those great neurologically brilliant years, you were primed to be active. So what are some of people's thoughts around how do we prime our 14, 15, 16-year-olds to be ready to step into action rather than just realizing that it's a possibility at that age?
I think it's a great question, Stephanie, and I think there's a lot more that needs to be done at primary level to start sowing the seeds for how young people can make a positive difference. I think primary COPs is a great example of that, but that, you know, even still, you know, it's tricky for us to get the level of engagement we would like to see from schools on that kind of program. So for me, I think democratic education is a crucial part of that. And when I talk about democratic education, it's in its widest sense. You know, it's about to understand the world that you live in and how you can lead positive difference. And my gut feeling is the UK education system doesn't do a good enough job of communicating what it means to be an individual in a democratic system, or how you can make a positive difference. So for me, I think the whole curriculum, to be honest, needs to be overhauled from 0 to 25 or whatever, where those kind of topics are discussed and young people have kind of almost, if you look at it as a tube journey, various different opportunities where they can engage with making a positive difference or social action from primary level right the way through. You know, that's what got me hooked as a 10-year-old, trying to, I think it was at the time, trying to convince the school to develop a tuck shop with apples and oranges. You know, it's those small those small steps that ultimately mean that when you get to the point of you know, that next step on that tube journey, that you feel prepared and ready. So that's just my 2 pence, but I'm going to shut up and let others chip in.
Just to respond quickly to what you said, Hayden, it sounds like I think I'm often thinking of how do I get the teens that I know, you know, into these opportunities. But maybe it's really more about what are the subtle ways that we start empowering 3, 4, 5, 7, 8-year-olds, so that when the opportunities show up for this kind of stuff, when they are a little bit older and more independent and so on, they already get that they have choice. As people were saying about when you've been in a democratic school environment, you grow into adulthood knowing that you have that kind of possibility.
If I may, just to weigh in on that, this is a challenge that we've been working through for the last, I don't know, 20 years at Youth Ottawa. There's a few things. Like, number one, it comes with having a democratic classroom from the start. What Derry was talking about, others been talking about. You know, you can't teach democratic engagement in a model of tyranny, which is what most classrooms are. It just doesn't happen, right? The medium is the message. If the medium is there's a benevolent tyrant maybe at the front of the classroom, right? That's still the person who's a decision maker. So at a start, kids have to have a decision-making power from the very start, from kindergarten. From the time they're young, there needs to be opportunities for them. Going forward, we have to, as educators, get out of the mindset of trying to engage people in issues. The mistake that we ran into, we ran something very similar to the Council of Portsmouth Students, their platform. We actually moved away from it because we found other ways of getting what we want to do, reaching out to disengaged youth. But what we ran into was we thought, okay, well, we're going to bring together people who are passionate about the environment, people who are passionate about this, and that will get kids engaged. No, the story that Hayden just told about, you know, trying to change the food in his tuck shop, If you listen to Ottawa's mayor discuss what got him into politics, it was an expose on how crappy the food was on in his school cafeteria. The most successful civic engagement programs we've run have revolved around the food in the cafeteria. And that's what happens when we do that in a high school civics class. That's where the kids in the back of the classroom who fail every other class except for civics flourish, because we sit back and say, what grinds your gears? Like, the giant cookies in the cafeteria aren't giant enough. And we say, cool, let's do something about that. And they change the menu in the cafeteria. That is a secret sauce. But 99% of our attempts to get kids engaged is like, look at all the problems in the world. What are you going to do about it? No. Let's start with what they're seeing first, and let's move to a concrete first step solution, and then go from there.
And Jerry Mintz, who was on the call, I don't know if he's still here, he has a video online that gives an excellent example of that with a kindergarten class, just asking them, like, what are your issues? And Jerry, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's about like going outside and how often they go outside. And Ian, I think your point is really excellent.
Yeah. Thanks, Sophie. And I'll say this, the solution is not rocket science.
Yeah.
But the resourcing of it, the building the structures, that is rocket science. That's where the true challenge lies. Like the solutions aren't that hard. And that's where I'm saying with these conferences, my plea as someone who has struggled in an underfunded organization, as I think so many of us has, is say the ideas, again, that we have no shortage of ideas about what to do in the classroom. What we have shortages of the resources to be able to implement those solutions effectively in an ongoing and long-term basis. You know, that's for me, that's where the real challenge is of where we're going forward.
But it's true, and those of us who have been involved with, like I was on the board of a Center for Self-Directed Learning, and you know, we had to close it, and it was funds, and it was one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever had to be involved with. And so you're absolutely right. And then of course there's all the other big pieces as well, which is, you know, I was having a conversation with a friend the other day who's a teacher, and she just said, you know, everything you're saying just sounds wonderful, but it's so idealistic. Like, how do I, you know, there's 30 kids in my class and 25 of them are willing to do the work and learn something, and there's 5 kids that are disrupting. And if I open up the class to democratic types of things, they're just going to cause chaos. And, you know, it's those, like, we all know how to steer through a conversation like that, but that's a big thing as well, is helping people to see possibilities, to truly see them.
Can I just weigh on that one a little bit? So when it comes to opening up classrooms for discussions, I can say that when I was sitting my GCSEs, our English teacher was probably the best at bringing our opinions out of all of us. All I can say is you just had to mention Trump or her husband, and that's it. Everyone was off task. Debates were raging through the classroom. And you might have looked at it, you could look at it from 2 perspectives, I think. Looking at a class of students being massively disruptive and not focusing on their learning, or a group of students who were actually learning how to carry a debate in a non-structured way. We would fly from, you know, the morals of religion to, should we even have to go to school? How, you know, how should employment work? All of these amazing big concepts that we probably shouldn't have been discussing in that lesson, but were incredibly powerful. And I think once you give young people these opportunities, they lose the novelty of having, I mean, freedom of speech shouldn't be a novelty, but it's like telling a child, look, you can eat all the food you want, and they're going to go crazy for the first few days, but after a while they're going to go, actually, it's not a big deal. I'll just eat it when I want. And when you give young people that platform to speak, the novelty will wear off eventually, and they'll just use that space meaningfully. And I think that's where, in a learning environment, I get that it's difficult, but you have to push past that boundary to begin with, and you have to give young people these opportunities. Otherwise, nothing's going to change. But yes, I would say if anyone works in education, don't be scared of letting your classroom run a little bit wild sometimes, because eventually you'll just end up with some really empowered young people.
Yeah, beautifully said, Ella. Like I couldn't agree more. And I think my mentor in this, the guy who hired me out of Teachers College, had this beautiful metaphor for what we were trying to do. And he talked about working as a kindergarten teacher in South Korea and staying up all night preparing a lesson plan on leaves, I believe it was. And Sure enough, he gets in there and it's a hot day, so they open the windows, and what comes in the window just as he about to start teaching but a butterfly. And he knew right away that you could not talk about leaves. It was now time to talk about a butterfly. And that's the metaphor I think has to guide our conversations, is understand when the butterfly flies in the room. And even better, and this is the true challenge I think of democratic classroom, is as a teacher, as an educator, how do we set the table to encourage butterflies to fly in the classroom? That's what we're looking for right there. And I'll let you hit the nail on the head. It's going to look ugly and messy at the start, but in all of the civic engagement projects that I've been engaged in, it follows a process where there's dead silence, and then there's like bedlam, and this is over like, you know, multiple weeks of a semester. And then all of a sudden at the end of it, if you do it right and you do it well, it hits it where you know, I love it. A student come up to ask me a question and they'll be like, and they turn and ask their classmate who is directing that part of the project. So it requires a lot of patience. And to your question, Stephanie, I think you hit the nail on the head. How do we convince teachers to take this on? Well, we help guide them. And so there has to be, and this is where we're running into it, there has to be a balance to understanding that most teachers, when they get into teaching, have gone through a high school or a school system that has trained them to be one way. They go to a teacher's college, which for however much they try is embedding like a marks-based, like, you know, curriculum checklist kind of thing. They are so not used to this that you need to have almost like a mentor or guide in the classroom to go along with it. So that's part of the solution. And that's where we found a lot of success. And like, we were able to take our social civic engagement program, and we grew it to the point where it was in nearly every single high school civic class in Ottawa. The problem is that we didn't resource it well enough, and we nearly killed ourselves. But we did that because we took a human-centered design. We worked with teachers on how we could help them to better help their students. And we grew by one teacher recommending to another teacher that they should take on our program. And it's all because what we're doing is when we're going in there, we were working with them.
You know, it's interesting because I was involved with some student teachers at the University of Toronto, and they were writing journal entries, you know, to publish and whatnot. And it was interesting that some of them maybe didn't know each other. There's hundreds in the program. And I was reviewing them, and it was quite interesting how innately they wrote about overlapping topics that didn't have to do with the usual system, with the conventional system. And nobody really wanted to hear it at the university yet, but I heard topics from various teachers about holistic development, about engaging outdoors, about being in flow, about play, nature, project-based learning, self-directed learning. They're talking about it on their own as students, maybe millennials, who are kind of in the in-between place of where we've been and where we innately want to go. And I think that a lot of the student teachers are thinking about these topics, even though they're being taught from the, you know, the industrial revolution model. I think they know themselves that there's a conflict.
May I cut in here for a moment, and then Bruno will get to you. I just, this conference would not have happened in the way that it has, so many incredible people coming together, if it had not been for the work of Arrow. Jerry Mintz is with us at this time, and I think that he deserves an awful lot of recognition for what he's done over the decades to collect people together internationally and really raise the profile of these issues that we're talking about. I wonder, Jerry, can we hear from you for just a moment, maybe?
What do you want to hear?
What would you like to tell us? Nothing, or?
Well, I think that this conference has a tremendous potential to be a precedent for other communities. And so people should consider using this approach and getting these kinds of resources to help make change in their own communities, because that's the only way we're going to do it, one community at a time.
Yeah, sure. No, I was just thinking that on top of all of this, don't you think that would be important as well to deconstruct certain ideas and understanding, for example, when talking about democracy, because I have the feeling that what I'm experiencing here in Finland as a classroom teacher and classroom teacher student, that everyone says that this education is democratic because they teach about democracy, right? They teach that the majority votes and that's what it goes and all of this, right? But in that sense, I don't know if we are creating like a construct that I don't know if it's representing what we are talking about. So do you think would it be important to also deconstruct or be critical towards something that we are giving for granted and maybe it's not what we are talking about? I don't know if this makes sense or.
Can I just jump in there a minute? Because I've had this discussion with my classes over the years, understanding the difference between consensus and democracy and dictatorship. And we talked about dictatorship, and I said, well, if there's a fire in the school, we're not going to sit down on the carpet in a circle and discuss how we're going to get out of the building. We're going to follow the direction because that's something that people have thought about, and it's the safest thing to do. But when it comes to a lot of the issues we deal with in classrooms, we have to sit down and discuss. And I think consensus is something that is not discussed a lot in school. Democracy, well, vote, and then your ideas might be considered. And we talked about the idea that all it has to be is a 9-8 vote, and the people that are part of that group of 8, none of their ideas will be considered because the people that were in the group of 9, they won by 1 vote. So this is the kind of discussion, I think, and it's out in the playground, when decisions are being made by students. Consensus is something that I think is out there, they are aware of, and they can bring it into the classroom, and then you can have those discussions. Democracy is kind of a, we know democracy apparently happens south of the border here in the United States, and look what happened there.
Hi, can I just say something on that point? Just following on the consensus idea and some problems with majority. Me and my partner Marty are going to be talking about sociocracy on Sunday, which is very much related to consensus and overcoming problem of majority rule. So anyone who's interested, I invite you to join that talk, and we're going to talk about the intersection between democratic education and sociocracy. So yeah, I think anyone who's interested in this point will be interested. That's it.
Can I make a comment, because I really must be on my way, but I've been really enjoying this conversation. One of the really tricky things for all of us, I think, and for most importantly for young people, is the fact that there is a consensus that education is important. And it's almost something that everybody goes, yes. But actually on both sides of this, education can be an absolute tyranny. And it can be very beautiful. Now, we are convinced at the moment that every minute of every day is important to a student in order to actually achieve what they're meant to be achieving. Where is the place for a butterfly in that? And that's one of the really, really tricky things. We have governments that still perceive and conceive of education, if you like, as a means of social control and not as a leading out and an enjoyable leading out. And we are, I said in what I was saying about Portsmouth, we are on a journey, but by heavens, we're only just beginning to start. And for us, it's been 19 years or 18 years. But this conversation must keep growing. And it's going to be a frustrating one, but it's going to be something that eventually the young people, and inviting many more into the process, will enable that democracy to grow and perhaps for education to be a beautiful experience rather than a tyranny for them.
I think one of the things that when we're looking at this idea of the consensus building, and I apologize, Charlie, I won't be able to attend the talk tomorrow, but I look forward to catching it later because that sounds really important. We have to have a shared grounding when we engage in democratic education. So the idea of consensus building, like when we run a civic engagement program in a civics class, we force the class to choose one project. And the reason we do that is because we want to get away from that majority rule. We want to get away from like, we all do our things in atomized bits and pieces, which is the problem with the nonprofit sector, frankly. And we want to force people to learn how to work together. And the biggest thing is we say, okay, let's talk about all the issues that are out there we get addressed. Now let's go through a consensus building process to find the one thing, the Venn diagram thing that everyone can agree is important. Because now once we've established we have a common ground of things we all care about, now we can start to practice and model the democratic process. Let's talk about epistemology, right? Now there's meaning behind what we're doing as a class and as a project. And now we can talk about shared values of truth and not truthiness, I might add. Now we can start to talk about what are our values? What are the impact measurements we want to go towards? Like all these things that go into the functioning of a democracy, right? A forum of public ideas. You can't do that until you have that shared epistemological grounding of what matters to us, what do we accept as truth, and where are we going? Like that consensus building, like when we talk about democratic classroom, a vote is actually, in my experience, the most harmful thing that we've done in trying to build a democratic classroom. The best thing we've done in democratic classroom building, again, like when I'm talking about I'm talking about we've had thousands and thousands of different classrooms we've worked with in our civic engagement programming. The best thing we've done is this consensus building process. It is the most important thing we do together because we get everyone on the same page, everyone sharing values and working together. Like that is the sine qua non of success.
Can I just say, in my experience of classroom democracy, maybe I just know particularly nice kids, but the idea of minority rights, which is why I think that we should always be talking about democracy and human rights in the same breath, and that respect for the minority's point of view is terribly important. And I've always found with kids that they like that idea. The idea that you should just win over somebody else and beat them down and ignore their point of view, that's not at all how I find young people. I find too many adults like that with our party political power games, but I don't find young people working a direct democracy in a classroom. That's just not my experience. And in fact, one of the rules that my class made, the hands up, the 5 hands up, and it goes quiet for 5 minutes, that rule was made to respect minority rights. It wasn't a majority decision. It only took 5 of the 34 kids to find the room unworkable, and the whole class would go quiet. And that was absolutely a consensus decision without any compulsory consensus, if you see what I mean. It was a spontaneous consensus that recognized the rights of the other, and not everybody's the same.
If I may, Derry, here's what we're seeing on the ground. And this is, I think, a direct impact of a few factors coming together. Number one, we stopped teaching civic education in the West. And you saw that preference for strongman leadership has increased year over year to the point where it's in the mid 30s, low 40s for the percentage of the population who prefer a dictator. Like this has just been a steady trend since the 1990s. And what I'm seeing locally, and I'm sure this is echoed around the world, is we have to name it, the biggest threat to democratic education right now is white supremacism. It is coming through in schools in Ottawa where white youth are saying blood and soil in the classroom directly. Like it is not growing, it has grown and metastasized to dangerous conditions. And so that idea of, yes, I agree, generally young people don't want to do that, but what I've seen happen in the last 5 years, especially working at a high school level, is that the echo chambers of social media, if you will, of the algorithms and the way YouTube shows content means that young people are actually far less likely to listen to one another than they have ever been in the past.
Could I suggest that might be partly to do with the authoritarian hierarchical ethos of the high school, that
Absolutely.
they in fact learned this implicitly from the way they've been treated, so we shouldn't be surprised if it takes them some time to unlearn it. But I'm talking about how kids treat each other if they've only known a democratic participative environment.
Yes, agreed. Yeah.
For example, Summerhill.